Sunlight slashes across the pilot lounge floor as Captain Laura Beck's boot heel snaps down beside 16-year-old Malik Carter's chair. Without warning, she rips his Horizon Airlines mentorship badge from his collar and hurls it onto the mahogany credenza. "Get out!" she hisses, her voice icy enough to freeze the room's quiet buzz. Heads swivel, chairs scrape back. Malik's heart pounds. He's just a student, not a threat yet. In that brutal instant, he's reduced to a stereotype, an unwelcome outsider in a space he dreamed of calling home. Drop a comment below, telling us where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to follow. Malik's fight for justice. Morning's first glow pours through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating rows of plush leather seats and the polished metal of flight bags neatly stowed beneath side tables. The hum of espresso machines and distant jet engines provides a steady undercurrent, a ritual pulse of elite routine. In the center of this curated calm sits Malik Carter, his posture-rapt eyes locked on a documentary about Concorde's final flight. His crisp polo and Horizon Airlines mentorship badge silver wings stamped with his name mark him as a chosen protege on the cusp of his dreams. Captain Laura Beck's arrival shatters the hush. She strides in shoulders squared beneath 4 glinting gold stripes. Her gaze sweeps the room white-knuckled around her travel mug. Then it lands on Malik. For a heartbeat, her face ramrod straight, unreadable. Then a flash of contempt. "This isn't your place, kid," she snaps, voice ricocheting off the mahogany and mirror-bright windows. The lounge's gentle murmur cuts off mid-sentence. Malik's pulse flares. He reaches reflexively for the badge Beck snatches from his collar, the pride he felt moments ago slipping like sand through his fingers. Beck flicks the badge onto the nearest sideboard, and it clinks against glassware, an emblem of his invitation turned to accusation. Behind her, a line of uniformed pilots and flight attendants freeze coffee cups inches from their lips. Even the barista at the espresso station holds her breath. Malik rises, palms open, voice steady, despite the quake in his chest. "Captain Beck, I'm part of the Horizon mentorship program. Sandra from HR escorted me here." "I didn't." Beck cuts him off. Her smile is cold, predatory. "Mentorship. Don't make me laugh. Pilots work hard to earn these wings. You don't belong here." Security chants. 2 officers appear at the doorway before Malik can blink. They move with deliberate authority. One reaches for Malik's arm, the other eyes his badge, as if sizing up a forgery. The lounge's elite clientele murmurs in dismay and relief, some nodding at Beck's decisive disdain. For Malik, time slows. He can still feel the hum of engines, the warm sunlight, the ache of possibility, only now everything threatens to collapse. He swallows, forcing a calm that feels impossible. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm here by invitation." Silence, Beck snaps. Her tone brooks no argument. "You're trespassing. Out. Now." The nearest pilot, a tall woman with an EIKS printout in hand, looks away. Others quietly resume their seats, shifting the tableau back to business as usual. Only Malik remains at the epicenter of this storm. An officer tightens his grip on Malik's arm. "Come on, kid," he says, the familiar paternal drawl of a drill instructor. "Let's clear this up outside." Malik lifts his chin. The documentary flickers on the flat screen behind him, supersonic jets trailing white contrails against cerulean skies. A stark contrast to the gathering gray in his own world. As he's guided toward the exit, the lounge's door closes behind them with a finality that echoes like a gavel. The muffled click leaves a vacuum in the room. Captain Beck steps forward, smoothing her uniform as though she's just conducted a routine security check. The badge, Malik's ticket to a future he'd worked so hard for, lies discarded, a casualty of prejudice. Outside the airport corridor stretches infinite, a guardrail between innocence and accusation. Malik pauses, breath trembling. He risks a glance back through the tinted glass. He sees faces turning away, draining color from the world he'd thought was waiting to welcome him. Tattooed on his mind is the crack in that mirror-bright lounge. One woman's hate turned privilege into a trap. But beyond that glass lies possibility. If he can hold on, if he can make them see who he truly is. The door swings shut, cameras hum, and Malik Carter steps forward into the fight of his life. The crackle of Captain Beck's voice over the radio split the lounge's hushed tension like a shotgun blast. Security code breach in the pilot lounge. Repeat code breach. Malik Carter's chest tightened, each heartbeat thudding in his ears. He felt the floor tilt beneath him as though the world he'd known where hard work and passion opened doors had become a stage set tilted on its hinges. He pushed himself to stand straighter, shoulders back. Chin lifted, though every muscle in his body screamed to curl into himself. "I'm part of the Horizon Airlines mentorship program," he managed, voice threading through the hum of whispers. "Sandra Lopez from HR escorted me here." The words tasted stale, as if he'd swallowed them days ago in prep sessions for this very moment, and yet no one had listened then. Now they swirled in recycled lounge air, heavy with the aftertaste of burnt coffee and jet fuel. A ripple of laughter cascaded through the off-duty pilots clustered around a high-top table. Their amusement was low, insidious, a whisper into a microphone, a grin shared behind aviator sunglasses. One pilot tie loosened, raised his latte in a half-mocking salute, eyes dancing with that old presumption the entitled domain of the cockpit belonged only to them. Malik's badge still glittered at his chest, though now it felt like a target painted bright against his navy polo. The security officers closed in their polished shoes, clicking against terrazzo. Malik could smell the clean synthetic scent of their uniforms. Something taut and official contrasted against his own sweat. He swallowed, feeling the badge slip under his shirt, as Beck's voice spat through the speaker again. "I said, remove that intruder." He met the gaze of the lead officer, a woman whose helmet of dark curls framed a face schooled in neutrality. Her expression remained unreadable, but in her eyes Malik saw the question he'd seen too many times before. "What are you doing here?" He tried again, his tone firmer now. "I've earned this spot. I was selected. Children in our city worked years for half this opportunity. Sandra personally verified my credentials." "You can call her." A smirk curled on the lips of one pilot lounging against a service cart. He raised his phone lens, trained. Malik's humiliation was their entertainment. He watched the red recording light bloom, illuminating the circle of sneers that orbited him. In their eyes, he was not a pupil or a protege. He was something else, something to be gawked at, a creature out of place. Malik's throat tightened. In that moment, he saw more clearly than ever how small he felt, how swiftly trust could shatter. The lounge's polished veneer peeled back to reveal the raw lacquer of bias underneath. Every assumption, every glance, every unspoken. He doesn't belong pressed into his spine like an iron bar. Yet beneath that weight, something hardened in Malik's chest, a spark of resolve. He had traced flight paths in his mind for years, learned to read control panels like Braille. This moment, this fractured tableau would not ground him. He inhaled, tasting metal and fear. "I am not an intruder," he said, voice echoing as the lounge fell silent. Again, pilots turning curious heads, a flight attendant pausing her latte stir. Space distortions, the soft thump of his heart in his ears, the slow burn of adrenaline. He forced himself to meet the eyes of the security officer. "I belong here as much as any captain." His words trembled, but in them lay truth. Behind him, the lounge's heavy glass doors loomed like a boundary between freedom and confinement. He'd walked through them with permission. Now they felt like a gate closing on him. He imagined sweat beating on fiberglass in summer, the solid knot of disbelief in his throat. The officers exchanged a glance. The woman next to him cleared her throat, lifting a clipboard. "Sir, you'll need to come with us. We'll verify your badge at security headquarters." Malik nodded, stepping forward, trying to anchor himself in the narrow corridor between accusation and protest. Each step echoed a staccato heartbeat in a silent hall. He felt the gallery's eyes cling to his back, tracking him as though he were a fugitive rather than a student with a future. Outside the lounge, the corridor's fluorescent lights glared down like interrogators. Malik's polished shoes carried him down the hall toward a fate he hadn't invited. He fought the urge to turn back, to pound on those doors, to shout, "I'm not your criminal." But he knew anger here would be another weapon turned on him. Instead, he held his head high. He had rehearsed this too in the quiet hush of his room while building model jets, how to stand tall, how to speak truth calmly. He had imagined judges in courtrooms, not pilots in lounges, but injustice was no respecter of places. Voices drifted after him, the echo of mocking laughter, faint but insistent. He clenched his fists at his sides. Let them laugh. Then they would see his dignity intact even as they tried to crush it. He rounded a corner and passed under a sign directing staff to secure operations. Beyond those doors lay the beige offices, the fluorescent glare, the linework of HR verifications and security protocols. Malik stepped inside, placing his only defense, his composure, on the desk before him. An agent glanced up from a bank of monitors. "You're the kid from the lounge," he said. No greeting, no courtesy. Malik met his gaze badge still shining at his chest. "I'm Malik Carter," he said evenly. "I'm a Horizon Airlines mentorship student. I was invited here. I haven't done anything wrong." Behind the agent screens flickered. The pilot lounge cameras froze on Malik's figure badge, glinting Captain Beck's pointed finger mid-accusation. The agent raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "We'll see about that." Malik felt the final click of steel around his future. He drew a breath, long, steady. Beyond these sterile walls, beyond the cameras and the whispers, he carried a promise to reclaim what had been stolen in plain sight. The first step, he knew, was simply to refuse to disappear. He met the agent's gaze unbowed. "Please call Sandra Lopez." Silence stretched. Then the agent unlocked Malik's badge number. He picked up the phone. As Malik stood in that beige office, steeling himself for the slow grind of official review, he leaned on the one thing no badge could capture: his own unwavering truth. Outside, the pilot lounge returned to its routines. Coffee machines hummed, leather chairs sank under new occupants, flight attendants adjusted their wings. But for Malik, nothing would ever be the same. He had seen the soft underbelly of privilege laid bare, and he carried the weight of that knowledge with defiant calm. And above it all, the distant drone of jet engines reminded him no matter how stormy the ground, the sky awaited those brave enough to rise. Malik's chest heaved as the door burst open, and two officers filled the frame stern, unyielding like sentries in a fortress he'd never meant to breach. Their polished badges caught the afternoon light, glinting with authority he now felt cut him to pieces. One officer's hand closed around Malik's wrist, firm enough to bruise, and the other's fingers encircled his elbow, steering him toward the exit. A wave of the crowd's murmured disapproval washed over him as he was pushed out of the pilot's lounge. "Call Sandra Lopez." Malik shouted, voice cracking like thin ice. He tugged futilely at the officer's sleeve, breath catching in his throat. But the officers maintained their stoic lines of discipline, no glance, no hesitation. They were the executors of Beck's decree. Remove the interloper, treat him as threat, quell the disturbance. Behind him, Beck's voice rattled through the lounge's speakers. "He's using a fake badge, possible security threat. Keep him out." It boomed with the finality of a gavel strike, cementing in every bystander's mind that Malik Carter, the mentorship program's shining hope, was now a criminal. He felt the leather of his chair slip from under him, the warm swirl of stale coffee and recycled air replaced by the cold click of clipped motions. Pilots who had once offered cursory greetings now traded glances, some disapproving, some outright amused. A young captain in aviator shades held up his phone recording. Malik's stomach churned. Each lens pointed at him was a jury's finger, each sneer a sentence. The corridor air was stale, laced with the scent of industrial cleaner bleach fighting the memory of jet fuel. Malik's pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out the faint squeak of security boots on polished tile. His vision tunneled everything beyond the two officers' shoulders, fading into a hum of whispers and half-formed judgments. He pressed his lips together, tasting copper and fear. One officer's grip tightened. "Keep moving," he said, tone flat. No warmth, no doubt. Malik tried to steady his breathing, inhaling raggedly. He didn't want to cry. He refused to give them that victory. Yet his thoughts tumbled in a clamor. Will Sandra vouch for me? Will HR admit the truth? Or will they whisper among themselves? Wonder why the black kid had dared to enter their hallowed sanctuary. They marched him past a row of gleaming lockers, each emblazoned with a pilot's name and call sign, where the men and women who commanded aircraft kept their helmets and flight plans. Malik recalled how he'd once imagined sitting in one of those lockers retrieving a flight jacket that bore his own name. Now the letters above him felt like mockery. Carter, imposter, guilty. He refused to look at them, eyes fixed on the polished floor, trying to concentrate on the small decision stand. Tall. Don't flinch. Don't break. Around the corner, the corridor opened into an anteroom lined with frosted glass. The doors to the security office where he knew they'd haul him for verification loomed before him. Malik's throat pulsed with the memory of Sandra Lopez's promise. "You'll be fine, Malik. They'll see your badge and know you belong." Her calm assurance had been the anchor in his dream. Now he wondered if she was even on site or lost in the bureaucracy of HR's shifting priorities. A pilot's voice floated behind him. "Shouldn't let kids wander free in here." It was a low remark, but between officers and the corridor tile, it resonated. Malik clenched his jaw so hard his molars cracked in his mind. He felt every word as a blow, a reminder that prejudice didn't require loud declarations. It thrived on these quiet casualties. They reached the door. The taller officer, whose dark uniform suggested a decade on the force, tapped his badge against the scanner. The red light flashed, locked. He swept his gaze to Malik. "Right this way," he said. Malik stepped through the door, swinging closed behind him with an abrupt finality that echoed like a prison cell snapping shut. Inside, the fluorescent glow was harsh, unforgiving. The walls pressed in plastered with operational protocol posters in sterile Helvetica. A bank of monitors frosted with fingerprints displayed live feeds, runways. Baggage claim, the very lounge Malik had loved a heartbeat ago. Now he saw himself in pixelated black and white cornered controlled confined. The officers guided him to a metal chair bolted to the floor. Malik lifted his chin, fighting the tremor in his limbs. He rested his hands, still cuffed at the wrist, on his lap. The handcuffs bit into his skin, a cold embrace that underscored his helplessness. He tried again. "My badge calls Sandra Lopez. She'll verify the program." His voice, thin as spun glass, trembled at the edges. The officer to his right shook his head. "Badge doesn't scan. Picture might be forged." He clicked his tongue as though tasting a bitter joke. Next to him, a younger officer scrolled on a tablet. The screen illuminated his skeptical frown. Malik saw the line they ran across Sandra's name, no record found program details absent. He had known HR systems were labyrinthine, but this felt like betrayal by technology itself. A tense moment passed, filled only by the buzz of the air conditioner. Malik's throat seared with dryness. He closed his eyes, willing himself not to collapse into sobs. He thought of his father's voice. "Always hold to the truth, son." He repeated it internally like a prayer. The truth: he was here by invitation. He was not a threat. He was every bit as entitled to role models' guidance and access as the people who looked down on him now. The officer at the tablet tapped a button. A new window popped up. "Program verification, contact Sandra Lopez," he read aloud. The officer hesitated, finger hovering over a red reject icon and a green approve icon. Malik's heart lurched. The world slowed as though waiting for a verdict, not just on his badge, but on his existence in that space. Then a click. The tablet slid closed. The officer leaned back. No response. Threshold passed. Must detain for further investigation. His voice measured as courtroom documents sounded like final judgment. Malik braced himself. His lungs screamed for air as panic rose in his throat. He swallowed hard, gathering the last of his courage. "You have to call Sandra Lopez," he said, voice steadier now, stronger. "She's on site, third floor HR wing. She'll confirm everything." The second officer glanced at his partner silently, weighing Malik's determination against protocol. The corridor watchers had faded away, their curiosity sated for now. All eyes were on these three men in the harsh fluorescent cell. After what felt like an eternity, the first officer inhaled slowly. "We'll call HR," he said, voice lower, almost reluctant. He scooted the tablet toward Malik, then hit a button. A soft dial tone buzzed. Malik let himself exhale. His pulse pounded so loudly it hurt. He leaned forward, fighting the weight on his chest. This call, this moment, would decide if he walked free or was carted off for further processing. The phone rang. Click. A click of keys. A sigh. Then a voice. "Human Resources." "This is Lopez." Malik's relief was a tremor in his bones. "Sandra, Malik Carter here. I'm at security. Captain Beck claims I used a fake badge. They need your verification. On the other end, a pause. Then Sandra's calm assurance poured through the receiver. Malik, of course your badge is valid. You're in Horizon's mentorship cohort. I'm walking to security right now. Malik closed his eyes, a single tear slipping free. He heard the officer relay Sandra's words. The younger guard's tablet buzzed. The red light switched to green. The cuffs clicked open. The two officers stepped back as Sandra herself burst through the door, breathless but confident. In that sterile room, Malik felt the tension drain away in a slow exhale. Security procedures had done their duty once corrected. Yet the ringing laughter, the cold suspicion, the mocking glances would linger in his bones far longer than any cuffs. Sandra reached him first, smoothing his polo collar. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly, anger flaring in her eyes. Instructions and apologies would follow, but for Malik the immediate truth was this. He had survived the public shaming, the staged accusation, the assault on his dignity. He had held fast to the truth of who he was. As he stepped out of the security office, Sandra by his side, the lounge's doors yawned open like the gates to a battlefield. Malik inhaled deep-tasting stale coffee and humiliated pride, but also the crisp air of vindication. The pilots looked away silent now, the power dynamic shifted by HR's swift intervention. Malik smoothed the badge at his chest, its metal cool against his palm. He squared his shoulders and walked back into the lounge, a place that had tried to bar him. But now, as the scandal in waiting, every step was a reclaiming of space, every breath a reminder that belonging didn't come from privilege alone, but from the courage to stand tall under fire. Malik's steps echoed against the slick tile as he was guided from the pilot's lounge. A soft click, almost imperceptible, marked the opening of the double glass doors, and he felt the airport's hum rush in to swallow him whole. The pulsating glow of fluorescent lights washed over him, bleaching color from the world and sharpening every edge until even the walls seemed to lean in, interrogating him. Behind those doors, the lounge's leather and polished metal had felt like a fortress. Now Malik was exposed, a lone figure corralled by suspicion amid the endless tide of travelers. In the corner of his eye, he saw a phone lift a slim rectangle cupped in the hands of a passing bystander. The lens trained on Malik's trembling frame, it recorded every nuance, the way his shoulders slumped, the faint quiver of his lips when he whispered, "This isn't over." That whisper grazed the edge of audibility, a fragile promise that didn't dare trespass beyond his own throat. Yet the camera captured it all. Malik's silent vow. Beck's lips curved in triumph, and the security officer's conflicting gazes, one rigid with procedure, the other weighted with hesitation. A shiver ran down his spine. He hadn't asked for an audience. He had come to learn to glimpse the cockpit controls of real airliners, to absorb every secret the pilot's sanctuary might offer. Instead, he walked through a tapestry of scorn and voyeurism, his life reduced to footage that could be paused, replayed, and remixed into yet another social media spectacle. The officer's grip on Malik's elbow was firm, an unspoken insistence to keep moving. Malik's mind flashed back to the bright optimism of that morning when Sandra Lopez had handed him the mentorship badge and promised an experience that would shape his future. How far that feeling seemed, now replaced by a rise of anger that swelled like an undercurrent threatening to break through the surface of his calm exterior. Outside the main terminal's glass facade loomed. Hustle and chatter streamed past families, reunited business people, hurrying to gates, children weaving among rolling suitcases. No one noticed Malik's passage. The injustice that clung to him like a second skin was invisible to the hurried crowd unless they scrolled through their feeds later and watched the scene captured on 100 cell phones. A gust of conditioned air brushed his face as the doors swung open fully. The terminal's heartbeat pounded in his ears, trolleys rolling, announcements blaring, distant engines whining. Everything amplified the isolation. He felt pinned between worlds, the sanctuary he'd sought and the judgment he'd been forced to endure. "Are you okay, Malik?" The voice startled him. It was Sandra. Her stride purposeful as she closed the distance in 3 quick steps. Her badge clipped to her lapel. Relief welled in his chest. Her presence felt like a lifeline. He managed a nod. Sandra glanced around, eyes sharp. She noticed the phone pointed at them, the gathering cluster of curious onlookers. A flicker of anger crossed her face, but she held it back. She knew that confrontation now would only risk further spectacle. Instead, she placed herself between Malik and the officers, folding her arms as though to shield him. One officer cleared his throat. "Miss Lopez, we still need to—" Sandra lifted her badge. HR approval confirmed. "He is part of the program. You've detained him long enough." Her tone was calm but unbreakably firm. The younger guard, the one whose eyes had softened earlier, glanced at his partner. The older officer exhaled and released Malik's arm. "Badge is valid," he muttered. "We'll escort him to the program office." Malik took an unsteady breath as the cuffs finally clinked open. The bite of cold steel left rusty imprints on his skin. He flexed his wrist, trying to ease the soreness in his joints. "Thank you, Sandra," he whispered. She offered a tight smile. "Let's get you out of here." Her hand hovered just above his elbow, a reminder that she was there, a tether to the world beyond accusation. They turned toward the program office, a narrow corridor lined with glass-walled meeting rooms, each one buzzing with administrative urgency. The smile faded from Malik's lips as the corridor's clinical sterility reminded him of the holding cell's harsh lights. He lifted his chin, steeling himself against the weight of betrayal. That phone camera had recorded his shame, and now in every monitor, every security feed, every smartphone in someone's pocket this moment would replay. Yet he refused to collapse under that glare. Sandra shot him a glance. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Malik drew in a slow breath. "I'm fine," he said, voice steadier than he felt. "But this was wrong." He ran a hand through his hair, damp with sweat. "I have no idea how many people think I was a criminal tonight." She looked down the corridor toward a cluster of HR cubicles. "We'll fix this," she promised. "I'll make sure a formal apology goes out." And that video, she pointed to the phone in the bystander's hand still humming. "We'll get that taken down, or at least context will be added. They'll see how you were mistreated." Malik let himself believe her. He focused on her confidence, on that glimmer of hope in her eyes. The injustice he'd endured had been raw and public, but perhaps it could be corrected, publicly corrected. They reached the HR reception desk, a wide slab of granite where a young assistant looked up behind a plexiglass shield. "Mr. Carter," the assistant asked. "We've been notified. Please come in." Malik and Sandra slipped into a small office where a round table and 3 chairs faced a whiteboard scrawled with onboarding steps. A mid-level HR manager sat behind a laptop, fingers poised over the keyboard. Her expression was a mix of apology and professional detachment. "Malik, I am so sorry this happened," she said, voice smooth. "We've issued a formal notice to security and the lounge staff. We'll follow up with every witness to clarify the misunderstanding. And we'll offer a written apology from Captain Beck, vetted and approved by upper management." Malik knotted his throat tight. He glanced at Sandra, grateful she'd brought him here. His hands, now free, tightened into fists. He felt the injustice burn beneath his skin, a hot ember that refused to cool. The HR manager clicked keys. "I'm drafting the memo now. You'll receive copies at your email." "Is there anything else we can do?" Malik swallowed. I want this documented. I want them to know I was invited, officially invited, and that this was prejudice, plain and simple." Sandra leaned forward. "We'll include that. I'll draft a statement. No person in our mentorship program should ever be treated this way." She glanced at Malik. "Does that cover it?" He took a steadying breath. "Yes. Thank you." It was all he could manage before the knot in his throat choked him. The HR manager nodded and typed. The document, line by line, would acknowledge the wrong, apologize, and set in motion systemic training to prevent recurrence, implicit bias workshops, sensitivity, training revised, lounge access protocols. Malik listened to the plan, glad for accountability, but aware that words on paper could feel hollow unless acted upon. He rose from the chair, Sandra at his side. "I should get going," he said. "I have an orientation session to attend." Outside, the terminal lights had dimmed slightly as evening approached. Malik stepped into the lobby again, heart pounding with residual adrenaline. A few travelers glanced his way, some with curiosity, some with remembrance of the moment's shock. But as he cleared the sliding doors, the vast expanse of departure gates unfolded before him. Screens blinking flight numbers, families hugging colleagues, chatting. Malik paused, inhaling. He realized that the terminal was a microcosm of the world at large, a place of constant movement, connection, and possibility. Yet that promise of inclusivity had cracked for him today. Now he resolved he would help mend it piece by piece. Sandra matched his stride. "Ready?" she asked. He looked at her, then back at the stream of passengers. "I am," he said, voice quiet but certain. "Because I won't let this define me." She offered an approving nod. "Good. Let's walk to orientation together." And so they moved on through the bright but indifferent crowd beneath the bright screens that announced flights to every corner of the globe. Malik's chest was lighter now, bolstered by recorded apologies, yet mindful that the path ahead required vigilance, a vigilant fight against prejudice, a determined charting of a course back to the dreams stalled by bias. As they turned a corner, Malik's gaze caught the face in the phone camera's screen, still pointed toward the lounge exit. He realized that others would see his image, his moment of injustice, through digital playback. Yet he also understood that this story now recorded could become a teaching moment. Evidence that prejudice thrives in quiet corners, that technology can both expose wrong and redress it, and that courage often means rising badge in hand under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights and walking on. This wasn't over indeed, but Malik Carter was ready. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind Malik, and the fluorescent glare of the holding room snapped on. In this narrow cell, bare concrete walls, a grated window too high to see through, and a lone water fountain trapped behind wire mesh, he felt the world contract to a few square feet of guilt and fear. Malik lowered himself onto the metal bench, its surface cold and unyielding against the seat of his jeans. The harsh echo of jet engines rumbling down distant taxiways droned through a tiny vent above his head, a constant reminder that the freedom he had chased all morning was now just a distant roar. His pulse pounded in his temples as he pressed one hand against the bench's edge, trying to steady himself. Behind those glass doors sat the pilot's lounge, his promised sanctuary where he'd imagined floating among professionals who would see him not as an outsider, but as a youngest-in-class prodigy. Now that vision lay in shards at his feet. Every idle whisper outside the cell, every shuffle of security boots seemed to underscore his disgrace, each footstep punctuating a question he could not answer. How could something so righteous have gone so wrong? He closed his eyes and let the memories drift in late summer afternoons, standing on the tarmac, with his father, Gregory Carter, guiding him through the hum of trijets and twin props. Malik had been only 8 when his father first lifted him into the front of a vintage Cessna 172. The cockpit had smelled of warmed vinyl and jet fuel residue. Gregory's calloused hand had rested on the yoke as he showed Malik how slight a turn of the wrist could bank the plane gently. "Feel it in your fingertips," his father had said, voice soft above the engine's drone. That's where the sky listens. In those moments, Malik had felt invincible, a tiny warrior in a world vast enough for both his dreams and his courage. He remembered his father's laughter as the Cessna dipped over an irrigation field, the sun slanting gold across his cheeks. Malik had looked over at Gregory, eyes shining, and for a heartbeat had believed that nothing could ever touch him. But now, seated alone under the sterile lights, those days felt impossibly far away. The laughter was replaced by the distant hum of judgment. He lifted one hand to touch the back of the water fountain's wire mesh, its metal ridges cool beneath his fingers. The water bubbled inside, unnoticed and unclaimed like an offering he could not reach. Malik's reflection in the polished nozzle shimmered, eyes wide, lips pressed thin. The spark of pride dimmed by doubt. He pictured his father's firm but kind eyes, the way Gregory always caught Malik's gaze, and conveyed a simple truth that mistakes did not define you, but how you recovered from them did. Malik drew in a slow breath, letting the memory fill his chest. A strange calm settled over him, mingling with the fear. He would not crumble here. He would stand again, because that was what his father would expect. A click sounded at the door. Malik jerked his head up, heart leaping. A pair of security officers peered through the small window, their expressions neutral but watchful. They moved aside when a slender figure slipped in. Sandra Lopez, her sharp features softened with concern. In her hand she held a clipboard, but her eyes were fixed on Malik as though measuring the depth of his distress. "Malik," she said quietly, stepping close enough that the officers did not intervene. I'm so sorry you're in here. Her voice was low, not wanting to draw the attention of the guards. I've arranged for someone to pick you up as soon as possible. Your badge has been cleared. You're free to go. Relief washed through him so fiercely he nearly gasped. He hauled himself to his feet, the bench clattering like a drumbeat behind him. Thank you, he managed, voice thick. But even as he spoke, a small tremor of doubt lingered. He had been cleared, yes, but the memory of Beck's disdain and the pilot's laughter would stick. It would take more than freedom from this room to erase the shame branded onto his chest. Sandra nodded and offered a tentative smile. Come on, she urged, turning back to the door. Let's get you to HR, sort out the apology and all that. Malik followed her past the guards who held the door open without a word. The corridor beyond felt suddenly bright, as if the light had shifted in his bones. But the hum of the terminal still vibrated through the walls, a reminder that corridors everywhere were lined with people who might judge before they heard. As they walked, Malik tapped his chest, where the mentorship badge now lay hidden beneath his shirt. The plastic held no stain, no flaw, but he could feel the weight of it more keenly than before. It was both a symbol of his achievement and a reminder of how fragile trust could be. Sandra walked beside him, stepping in and out of shifting pools of light cast by overhead fixtures. Each reflection she passed in the polished floor glanced back at her like a silent witness to Malik's ordeal. They reached the HR lobby where a young assistant offered Malik a seat and a glass of water. Malik cradled the cup, letting the cool liquid ground him. He felt Sandra's gaze on him steady and unwavering. He nodded his thanks and took a small sip, willing his hands to stop shaking. Across the room, a security officer approached, clipboard in hand. Mr. Carter, he asked. We have that apology drafted for Captain Beck. She'll read it and send it to every witness. He hesitated. And here's your badge back. Malik closed his eyes as he took the badge. The plastic felt smooth beneath his fingers, a stark contrast to the cold steel of the cuffs. He pinned it above his heart where it belonged. Well, Sandra said, voice quiet but firm. Shall we get you to your next session? Malik straightened, drawing in a measured breath. Yeah, he said, a flicker of resolve lighting his eyes. Yeah, let's do it. They stood and Malik walked out of that small room with his head held a little higher, each step carrying the weight of what he'd endured and the promise of what he would become. The drone of planes outside sounded different now, less like an indictment and more like an invitation. He would return to the pilot's lounge one day, not just as a visitor, but as someone who had earned his place, someone who had turned prejudice into a stepping stone rather than a barrier. And as he passed through the sliding doors back into the terminal's flow, he resolved that no cell, no moment of shame would ever clip the wings of his dream again. Lieutenant Rachel Monroe paused at the threshold of the holding cell corridor, her polished badge catching the harsh fluorescent glare. The empty corridor beyond was littered with discarded clipboards and an overturned chair, evidence of the frenzied afternoon skirmish. In her hand, she clutched a small leather-bound notebook, its pages already filled with scribbled observations and witness statements. Behind her, two uniformed officers shifted uneasily, fully aware of the storm they'd just weathered. Monroe's gaze swept the cell's interior. Malik Carter, standing by the wire mesh water fountain, shoulders squared as though bracing against an invisible gale. HR Representative Sandra Lopez hovered by the door, her posture rigid with concern. Captain Laura Beck stood nearby in the corridor, arms folded tight across her chest, face flushed with a mixture of indignation and uncertainty. Monroe inhaled slowly, the sharp tang of disinfectant and jet fuel hanging in the air, and stepped inside. Lieutenant Monroe, one of the officers, intoned with a slight bow of his head. We've complied with your request. Monroe nodded curtly. Thank you, Sergeant. Her eyes met Malik's for a brief moment, a silent apology and promise flickering in the depths of her gray-blue stare before turning her attention to Beck. Captain Beck, I understand you called security on this young man believing he was using a counterfeit badge. Is that correct? Beck's lips twitched. She shifted her weight, suddenly aware that the corridor felt too narrow for her to hide behind her authority. Yes, ma'am. There was no immediate documentation verifying his program enrollment. I acted in the interest of safety. Monroe flipped open her notebook, pen poised. Walk me through your thought process. Her tone was calm, but carried lethal precision, the same steadiness she used when briefing officers before a high-stakes operation. What specifically raised your suspicion? Beck fell silent for a moment, glancing at the notebook, as if its blank pages might swallow her explanation. I saw him sitting alone in the pilot lounge. She began with a badge that visually didn't match the official credentials we're trained to recognize. The lounge is a restricted area. Protocol dictates that any unauthorized individual could pose a security risk. I called code breach immediately. Monroe nodded as if filing the statement away. She turned toward Malik. "Young man," she said, voice gentler. "Now, your program badge, describe it for me." Malik drew a deep breath, steadying his rasped voice. Its silver holographic seal in the corner, red stripe along the top edge. It bears my photo name and the program code. HR issued it this morning. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced the badge, still pinned but undamaged despite the day's turmoil. Sandra Lopez gave it to me. Monroe took the badge in her gloved hand, inspecting the hologram's shifting colors under the flickering light. Program code, she repeated, flipping the badge over. There, embossed faintly in microprint, was the code Monroe recognized from her morning briefing. She looked up, eyebrow arched. "Sergeant, verify this," she ordered. "Run his badge through the system." The sergeant nodded and stepped out into the corridor, radio in hand. A pair of tapping keys followed as he accessed the terminal. The corridor fell quiet, save for the soft click of keys and the hum of the building's ventilation. Beck lowered her head, arms unfolding to rest awkwardly at her sides. Sandra Lopez hovered behind Malik, her presence a steadying anchor. Malik stood firm, breathing less ragged now. His tormentors had become silent observers under Monroe's measured scrutiny. Seconds ticked by like hours. Then through the small window in the cell door, the sergeant's face reappeared. "Badges valid, ma'am," he reported. "Malik Carter, Horizon Airlines mentorship program confirmed." Monroe's voice carried over the cell's lock. "Malik Carter, you're free of any wrongdoing." She placed the badge back into Malik's trembling hand. "I apologize for the distress you've endured today." Her gaze shifted to Beck. "Captain Beck, protocol exists to ensure safety, never to undermine justice. Today you compromised both." Beck's shoulders slumped, the uniform's crisp lines melting into defeat. I'm sorry, Lieutenant. I should have asked for verification before calling it in." Monroe closed her notebook with a firm snap. "Security is essential," she acknowledged, voice softer now, "but never at the cost of presuming guilt. We train our officers to observe, to question, but also to listen when evidence speaks louder than doubt." She turned back to Malik. "Are you all right, Mr. Carter?" Malik swallowed. His throat still felt thick, but he managed a small nod. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for seeing the truth." Monroe inclined her head. "Come with us," she said, motioning toward the corridor. "Let's get you back to HR and we'll make sure you receive a formal apology from the department." Then softer still, "I understand this was humiliating. Please accept my personal apologies." As Malik stepped forward, Sandra at his side, Beck falling back to follow Monroe, ushered him into the corridor. She kept her hand on the door, ensuring it remained open. The cell's harsh lights receded behind them, the hall stretching out into bustling airport operations. Pilots, crew, and passengers pulsed past in a flowing current that had briefly subsumed Malik and left him stranded. Monroe walked beside him, voice lowered so only he could hear. "That was never the place for you," she said quietly, "and definitely not for the captain's misplaced judgments. You belong wherever your dreams take you. No cell, no salute, no rank overrides your right to presence." Malik looked up, astonished. "Thank you, Lieutenant." She offered a reassuring smile. "Let's get you out of here." At the HR desk, the staffer greeted Malik with wide eyes and began typing an apology form addressed to Horizon Airlines leadership, his words already drafting a formal admission of error. Beck lingered by the door, expression contrite, as she watched the men being sewn. Lieutenant Monroe lingered long enough to see Malik's shoulders relax slightly. Then, folding her arms behind her back, she turned to Beck. "I'll expect a report on how we'll prevent this in the future," she said. "Security memoranda, retraining sessions, whatever it takes." Her voice held the heft of command, but also the promise of better days to come. Beck nodded, chastened. Yes, Lieutenant. I won't let it happen again. Monroe's gaze softened. Good. She placed a steadying hand on the captain's elbow. Learn from this. With that, she strode away, notebook under arm heels, clicking a determined echo down the tile floor. Behind her, the airport's hum resumed full volume, grateful passengers rolling suitcases, distant PA announcements. But in the wake of her passage, a subtle current of change rippled through the heart of Horizon Airlines' local operations. Malik stood at the desk, exhaling as though he'd held his breath all day. He glanced at Sandra, whose proud smile gave him the courage to lift his chin. In that moment, the shadow of prejudice receded enough for him to see again the wide sky he'd once believed was his birthright. He tucked the mentorship badge safely into his pocket and stepped out into the terminal's bright glare, each stride lighter, each breath freer, ready to reclaim the dream they had all but tried to remove from him. The fluorescent lights of the terminal corridor glared down like interrogation lamps, as Gregory Carter paused at the threshold, his polished brass badge catching their stark glare. The low hum of conversations, rolling suitcases, and distant flight announcements stuttered into sudden silence. Airport security officers, HR personnel, even off-duty pilots leaning against kiosks straightened their postures. In the hush, every sharp crease of Carter's uniform and every measured step reverberated. At his side stood Malik Carter, still clutching his mentorship badge, the afternoon's ordeal etched into the set of his shoulders and the dark circles beneath his eyes. Behind him, Lieutenant Rachel Monroe and Sandra Lopez fell back a respectful pace, while Captain Laura Beck hovered closer to the wall arms folded tight in guarded apprehension. Carter's eyes swept the narrow corridor, absorbing the collected faces, some curious, others sheepish, many uncertain. Then he fixed his gaze on Beck. She met his stare with a flicker of defiance, but her composure quavered under his calm intensity. He paused, the steady weight of his authority thudding in the silence. A terminal PA crackled overhead, an aerodynamic echo of some far-off takeoff sequence, but no one moved to answer it. They were all waiting. Gregory Carter laid a steady hand on Malik's trembling shoulder. He knelt slowly, matching his son's height, so their eyes met. Malik, he said, voice low and resonant, "You did everything right. I'm proud of you." Malik's chin lifted a fraction. The storm of humiliation in his eyes softened. Carter rose, turning toward Beck. The air seemed to condense around him. "Captain Beck." He began, his tone courteous but unflinching. "My son holds valid credentials issued by Horizon Airlines and endorsed by the FAA. He is part of an official program designed to cultivate future aviators. His presence here was neither unauthorized nor suspicious." Beck swallowed as her defiant firewall cracked. "Sir Administrator Carter, I was only following procedure," she managed, voice brittle. She glanced at the lieutenant and the imposing figure of the FAA regional head, her proud posture wilting. Carter nodded once as though acknowledging her concern, but he did not mince words. "Procedure," he repeated, "is only as sound as the judgment that enforces it. Today your judgment failed an innocent teenager, someone I entrusted to our industry's care." Each word landed like a steel rivet, securing the moral center of the moment. A young security guard who'd been among those summoned to enforce Beck's directive cleared his throat and offered a hesitant bow. "Sir, He looked at Carter's badge, then at Malik. "Apologies, Administrator. He trailed off, unable to articulate the collapse of his own certainty. Monroe stepped forward, guiding the guard gently aside. "This young man has my personal apology," she said firmly to Malik. Then she addressed the gathering crowd. "Let this be a reminder, our duty to security must be balanced by our duty to justice and respect." The officers around her muttered assent, their earlier resolve shifting into a collective remorse. Sandra Lopez slipped to Malik's side, offering him a water bottle. He took it with a grateful nod. Carter placed a supportive hand on Lopez's shoulder, acknowledging her steadfast belief in his son. "Thank you," he said quietly. Turning back to Beck, Carter allowed a hint of sorrow to touch his eyes. "I know you've dedicated decades to flight safety. I respect that completely. But today you let fear overshadow fairness. I trust you'll reflect on that." Beck's lips parted in protest, but no sound escaped. A hushed murmur rippled through the group. Passengers passing through the corridor paused, sensing the gravity of a private reckoning unfolding in public space. Some raised their phones but then lowered them. The power of the moment demanded more than a fleeting snapshot. Carter stepped aside, offering Malik the lead. "Come on," he said, voice as warm as the terminal's early evening glow. "Let's get you back to HR and ensure this doesn't derail your dreams." Malik hesitated a moment, then followed one steady stride at a time, across the linoleum floor that reflected the overhead lights like a glass runway. As they walked, Carter addressed the assembled personnel. "Going forward, we will review our security protocols. We'll ensure every officer and crew member understands that misjudgment can do more damage than any external threat." He paused before Beck. "I'll be in touch to discuss how we can retrain staff to spot real risks without blind spots of bias." Then with a firm nod, he turned and walked on. Beck remained rooted to the spot, her eyes watching the father-son pair recede into the distance. The corridor's clamor gently resumed rolling trolleys overhead. Announcements, the distant growl of arriving flights. But the station's atmosphere had shifted irrevocably. Where once suspicion had reigned, there now lingered a quieter resolve that vigilance must always be tempered by fairness, and that authority conferred a duty to protect dignity as well as security. As Carter and Malik reached the HR desk, the staffer rose to present a formal release form, the same one Monroe had initiated. Malik scanned the document, then signed with a steady hand. Carter watched with pride as his son reclaimed his agency, his future no longer bound by yesterday's cruelty. Outside the lounge, the terminal's evening rush carried on, passengers flowing like currents around immovable columns. Yet for those who had witnessed the confrontation, the fleeting crash of prejudice, the decisive arrival of justice, their worldviews had shifted. Every uniformed silhouette now carried a reminder that true authority stands not on fear, but on the unwavering respect for every individual's worth. In the heart of that vast airport, the Carter duo paused at the edge of the lounge's glossy glass doors. Malik turned to his father, eyes bright with gratitude. Carter smiled, ruffling his son's hair in a rare gesture of paternal warmth. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Malik nodded. "And ready to chase my dream all over again." Carter gripped his son's shoulder one last time. "That's my boy." Together they stepped through the doors, leaving behind the scene of their redemption, carrying forward a story that would quietly reshape every heart and corridor it touched. The harsh glare of fluorescent tubes cut through the shadowed corner of the security office, where a bank of monitors lined the wall like silent witnesses. Lieutenant Monroe Gregory Carter, Captain Beck, and a handful of airport officials clustered around a small table, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow. A security technician, glasses perched low on his nose, hovered at the keyboard. With a practiced tap, he called up the morning's footage. The main screen crackled to life, filling the room with a live playback view of the pilot lounge entrance. Sandra Lopez's crisp HR blazer appeared first, her badge gleaming as she guided Malik Carter ID firmly in hand through the double doors. Lopez paused to adjust Malik's badge ribbon, then offered him a reassuring nod before striding back down the corridor. Malik entered, eyes fixed on the room's plush leather chairs and TV screen. He crossed to a corner seat, sat without hesitation, and leaned forward, absorbed in a documentary on jet engine mechanics. His shoulders, though small, were squared, unworried, unguarded. No furtive glances, no furtive movements, just a boy enthralled by the hum of turbine sounds. Monroe watched, arms crossed, her brow furrowed. Nearby, Beck's posture stiffened again, as though the footage itself were a rebuke she couldn't bear to meet. Carter's steady gaze never left the screen. Even in rewind, Malik's calm composure resonated more powerfully than 1,000 frantic denials. The technician keyed in another clip. Beck's abrupt entrance, her uniformed authority crashing through the lounge's quiet. The camera captured her sharp question. "Who let you in here?" And Malik's polite but firm answer, "Sandra Lopez from HR." His voice was barely audible, yet unmistakable, respectful, unwavering. Beck's response flickered on the screen next, a dismissive smirk, the snatching of Malik's badge, the instant tension that rippled outward, as whispers rose among off-duty pilots. Then the arrival of 2 security officers, their faces set like granite. They moved to seize Malik's wrists, even as he protested, "Please call her." His words swallowed by the shroud of suspicion. In the security office, the silence was absolute. Only the hum of servers and the muted whir of hard drives broke the stillness. Monroe finally exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath. That she said quietly as protocol gone wrong. Beck's eyes flickered upward, but she offered no challenge. Instead, she stared at Malik's likeness on the screen, his eyes level, unafraid, the picture of innocence. The film looped briefly on him, standing as the officers led him away, the lounge's warmth giving way to the corridor's harsher light. Malik's lips moved in a whisper. "This isn't over," he'd said. Now the words seemed to echo off the tile floor. Carter cleared his throat, his voice the first to crack the authority of the moment. "This footage confirms everything Sandra and I have said. There was no breach, no false credentials. There was only prejudice." He folded his hands behind his back, the sleeves of his dress shirt crisp beneath his uniform's epaulets. A junior HR manager, flush with newfound vindication, stepped forward. "Lieutenant Monroe, with this evidence, we can immediately clear Malik's record. We can update all relevant logs to reflect that his badge was issued legitimately this morning." Monroe nodded. "Do it," she said. Then turning to Beck, she softened. "Captain, you'll want to review this yourself." She handed Beck a tablet, the same recording cued and ready to play. Beck swallowed hard thumb, brushing the screen as she brought up Malik's peaceful profile. She watched his composed silhouette and then the flash of indignation that had creased his brow when she first challenged him. Across the room, Beck's own reflection shimmered, proud wings pinned high, uniform immaculate, yet her eyes now shadowed with regret. The technician paused the reel on Malik's still frame, zooming in on his ID ribbon. "See that," he said, voice flat but kind. "Name, photo, and clearance level, everything matches HR and FAA records." He stepped back. No one spoke for several heartbeats. Then Carter lifted his gaze to the faces around him. "Let this be a lesson," he said. "Security matters. Absolutely. But security must never be enforced at the price of justice." A murmur of agreement rippled through the men and women in uniform. The soft clicking of badges being repinned, folders being straightened, and pens being unclipped from pockets sounded like a small symphony of redemption. Beck exhaled a slow, tremulous breath. She raised her head, eyes meeting Malik's image. I'm sorry," she said, voice barely above a whisper. The apology felt too small too late, but it was there, offered at last. Carter nodded gravely. "Thank you," he said. "What matters now is how we move forward." He gestured toward the door where Malik waited with Lopez and Monroe. "Let's bring him back in and ensure he receives the respect he was owed from the start." Monroe flicked a switch and the monitors dimmed. The room's lighting softened the glare of confrontation, replaced by collaborative purpose. Carter led the way out of the security office, the others falling into a single file. As they stepped into the corridor, the recorded roar of arriving flights swelled in the background, reminding everyone that lifelike aviation thrives on forward motion. Footsteps rang clear on the tile as they approached the pilot lounge. Malik stood just inside the entrance, flanked by Lopez and Monroe, his head held high. Beck paused at the threshold. She lifted one hand in a hesitant salute, her lips parting as though to speak. Malik met her eyes, and in his gaze she recognized not defiance, but the simple dignity she had once so quickly denied. She straightened, squared her shoulders, and inclined her head. "Captain Beck," she said with renewed confidence, "I'd like to offer you my apology publicly if you'll allow." Her uniformed form seemed smaller in the wide lounge, yet her voice carried. Malik nodded once, the ghost of a relieved smile tracing his lips. "Thank you," he said, his tone gracious. Then he turned and strode toward Sandra Lopez, who swept him into a quick, proud embrace. Monroe lingered at Beck's side for a moment, then stepped forward. "The lounge is yours again," she told Malik, "and it belongs to every future pilot who earns his place here." As Carter and Lopez guided Malik back into the fold this time, to genuine welcome. The lounge's atmosphere shifted completely. Jarred laughter softened into genuine greetings. Pilots offered him seats and coffee. The documentary resumed on the TV, a backdrop to new conversations about engine thrust and aerodynamics. Beck drifted toward the far corner, removing a fresh badge from her pocket, a special recognition crest for exemplary flight safety instructors. With a quiet hand, she clipped it to Malik's lapel. He looked up in surprise, then gratitude illuminated his face. "There," Beck said, voice steadier now, "on behalf of all of us who took a wrong turn this morning. Her gaze flickered to Carter, who nodded appreciation, and then to Malik, whose determined smile shone brighter than any overhead lamp. In that moment, the hum of the documentary's narration, the low rumble of tanker taxi-outs, the soft shuffle of piloting boots on carpet, the series of misjudgments was erased. The day's true lesson had landed safely, that fairness once restored could lift all who rely on it. And as Malik sank into a chair beside his father, ready to watch planes carve trails across the sky, the lounge returned to its role as a sanctuary of dreams, a place where every future pilot, regardless of age or background, could chart a course by merit, not prejudice. The tension in the pilot lounge had scarcely begun to ebb when Lieutenant Monroe's voice cut through the murmurs firm and unwavering. Effective immediately, Captain Beck is suspended pending a full review of her conduct. We will conduct this investigation with complete transparency. Her declaration hung in the air, heavy as the thunderhead clouds of an approaching storm. The clustered pilots and staff faces flickered momentarily with surprise, then resolve. One by one, they turned toward Malik Carter, the boy whose quiet dignity had shattered their complacency. Captain Beck stood to the side, uniform immaculate, but her spirit visibly unraveling. Tears glistened at the corners of her eyes as she grappled with the enormity of her error. Now stripped of the assumed infallibility that had girded her authority for 2 decades, she seemed smaller, human, flawed, vulnerable. In that raw moment, her shoulders slumped and she whispered the apology again, clearer this time. "Malik, I'm so sorry. I judged you without knowing you. You did nothing wrong." Malik sat head bowed for a heartbeat, absorbing the full weight of her words. Then he rose, each movement deliberate, forging a bridge of grace. "Captain Beck," he said, voice steady. "Thank you for saying that. I hope this helps you see how powerful your words and actions can be." He offered his hand. Beck's fingers trembled as she took it, her grip a silent vow to reckon with the prejudice she'd unleashed. Around them, the pilot lounge transformed. Where scorn had reigned, empathy now took root. A senior first officer who earlier had laughed behind his hand stepped forward. "Malik, I'm sorry," he said, head bowed. "I should have spoken up when I saw what was happening." His colleagues followed, a handful of pilots whose earlier glances of doubt now brimmed with contrition as they offered nods of apology and outstretched hands. Lieutenant Monroe watched the scene, pride mingling with relief. She moved to Malik's side and placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. "You have shown us all what true grace looks like," she said softly. "I promise this department will learn from today." Monroe turned to face the room, her gaze encompassing every uniformed officer, every airline employee present. "Let this be the start of real change," she intoned. "From this day forward, our security protocols must include vigilance against bias as much as suspicion of threats." The subtle hum of arriving jets from beyond the lounge's panoramic windows seemed to underscore her words. Engines braked softly on the tarmac, their mechanical rumble a reminder that safety in the skies depends as much on human fairness as on technical precision. As staff began to disperse, some to fetch fresh coffee, others to consult their tablets, Monroe laid out next steps: a department-wide review of cultural sensitivity training, mandatory workshops on implicit bias, and creation of an anonymous reporting system for incidents of discrimination. Each proposal was met with nods and murmurs of approval. The mood, once brittle with tension, now glowed with communal purpose. Beck lingered by the door, watching Malik gather his badge back from Sandra Lopez. Lopez pressed it into his hand with a warm, protective smile. "Keep this," she said. "It's yours. It belongs to you." Malik's fingers closed around the badge, a tangible emblem of his hard-earned place in a world that momentarily closed its doors on him. In the corridors, Malik stepped out alongside his father, Gregory Carter. The frantic rush of daily operations resumed in the main terminal beyond. Travelers wheeled their luggage, flight attendants prepared for boarding calls, and the ever-present din of rolling suitcases against polished tile resumed its cadence. Yet something fundamental had shifted in the quiet exchanges between passengers and staff, in the softer barbs of good morning smiles. There was a newfound awareness that every person, no matter their age or background, deserved dignity and respect. Malik paused beneath a terminal clock, its hands pointing resolutely toward noon. He turned to his father, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. Dad, he said, voice bright with relief. Thank you for coming. Gregory Carter's eyes softened as he placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. You showed courage today, son. I'm proud of you. Their embrace was brief but full of unspoken pride, a passing of strength from one generation to the next. Behind them, Captain Johnson, who had first invited Malik into the cockpit, emerged from the lounge. She nodded at Beck, then turned to Malik. You ready for that tour? She asked with a playful grin. Malik's face lit up. Absolutely, he replied. Together they made their way toward the waiting Boeing 787, each step a testament to the redemption that blooms when justice is restored. Back in the pilot lounge, Beck watched them go, her eyes shining with tears. She exhaled slowly, then turned to Monroe. Lieutenant, I want to do more than be sorry. I want to help drive the change you outlined. Monroe smiled. I know you do, Captain, and we'll need every ally we can find. Outside jets accelerated down runways, rose on winds of hope, and climbed into skies vast enough to hold all ambitions. Security gates buzzed with renewed purpose, now fortified not only by locked doors and clearance badges, but by a commitment to fairness that would help safeguard every dream that took flight beneath those wings. In the days that followed, the airport boardroom buzzed with the development of new training modules, the hum of positive momentum replacing the dread of the previous morning. Malik's story became part of the airport's welcome newsletter, a cautionary tale-turned celebration of equity. Passengers arriving in Terminal B saw posters proclaiming every path to the cockpit starts with respect. And at the heart of it all, in a quiet office overlooking the runway, Gregory Carter penned a letter to the entire airline staff. Today, a young man named Malik Carter reminded us that the true currency of aviation is trust, and that trust is built on justice. Let us honor his resilience by ensuring no one else endures what he felt. Let today's lesson fly with us always. His words took wing in every inbox and bulletin board, carrying the promise that in this place, where people soared above the clouds, human decency would remain the firmest ground. The training hangar at Horizon Airlines glowed with late afternoon light, filtering through high-arched windows. Rows of nervous recruits sat before banked flight simulators, their uniforms crisp, their eyes wide with anticipation. At the center of this tableau stood Malik Carter, once the unsure teenager thrust into a harsh interrogation, now the very image of composure. His uniform bore the same silver wings of the mentorship program that had almost cost him everything, and beneath its sheen lay a quiet resilience forged in that crucible of prejudice. Malik glanced up at the faces before him, tracing the reflections of jet engines on their eager expressions. He remembered the panic in the pilot lounge, the cold snap of Captain Beck's accusation, and the suffocating hum of the holding cell that had threatened to bury his dream. But more vividly, he recalled the steadying hand of Lieutenant Monroe, the indomitable arrival of his father, FAA Regional Administrator Gregory Carter, and the unwavering support of Captain Amara Johnson, who had opened the cockpit door to him. Their faith had rekindled his own. I know how it feels, Malik began, his voice calm but resonant, carrying across the spacious room. To be in a place meant for pilots and feel utterly alien, to have your identity questioned on the basis of nothing more than the color of your skin. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. That day I thought my dream was shattered, grounded, before it even had a chance to take off. A hush fell over the recruits. The simulator's screens glowed with complex dashboards and faux clouds, but nothing could distract from Malik's presence. He inhaled the soft scent of hydraulic fluid and machine oil mingling with the faint hum of landing gear tests down the hall. But I learned something crucial: when injustice grounds you, let integrity lift you back up. He stepped forward, the fabric of his uniform shifting like the currents beneath an aircraft's wings. Integrity means owning your truth even when everyone else doubts you. It means standing your ground respectfully, using your voice to call out wrongs, not with anger, but with the quiet certainty that your dignity is worth protecting. Malik's gaze drifted to the glass wall at the rear of the hangar, where Captain Johnson's reflection watched him, a silent affirmation of mentorship and solidarity. Outside, a line of gleaming airliners prepared for departure, their engines idling in a synchronized chorus. The recruits followed his eyes to the runway beyond, where planes arced skyward, vanishing into the cerulean expanse. In the skies, Malik continued, "There's no room for bias. A pilot doesn't ask a passenger's background before ensuring their seatbelt is fastened. Safety depends on fairness. Each person, no matter their age, race, or accent, deserves that same unwavering attention to their humanity. He unfolded a small pamphlet from his breast pocket, the newly instituted Equity Takes Flight Manual, co-authored by his father's FAA initiative. This guide is our commitment to you. We train our eyes to spot hazards, not color. We calibrate our instruments to measure performance, not prejudice. And we chart our course by ethics as much as by physics. A slender hand raised in the front row. A recruit, pale with nerves, asked, "Sir, how did you find the courage to speak up? When you were so afraid," Malik searched her earnest face, recalling his own trembling voice in the holding cell. "Fear is natural," he admitted. "What matters is what you do with it. I chose to call my father because I believed he would stand by me. And he did. But fear can be its own spark. It can illuminate what matters most. And for me, the most important thing was not to be silenced." He recalled the moment his phone rang and his father's comforting baritone cut through the panic. "Stay calm, son. I'm on my way. I won't let anyone disrespect you." That promise had anchored him. Find your anchor, whether it's a mentor, a moral compass, or your own inner code of honor, and let that guide you when the world seems ready to dismiss you. Another trainee nodded as if struck by lightning. Their uniform bore the stripes of a future first officer. They'd flown dozens of simulator hours but never faced real-world scrutiny. "Sir, do you think everyone here can change?" they asked. Voice steady. Malik's smile was gentle but unflinching. "Yes, because we're all capable of auditing our own biases. Today I see that each of you has listened to my story, to the stories of those who came before us. That willingness to listen is the first step toward change." He turned to Captain Johnson's reflection again, then back to the recruits. "Bravo to those who defended me, Lieutenant Monroe, who reminded us that security without justice is hollow. My father, who used his authority to protect truth. Captain Johnson, who opened the cockpit door when the lounge doors slammed shut. Their bravery changed my life. Now it's your turn to be that ally." A soft clatter as a few recruits set pen to paper, jotting quick notes. Eyes brightened, posture straightened. In the corner, a senior flight instructor quietly observed, lips pressed in a satisfied curve. Malik closed the pamphlet and folded his hands. "I stand here not as a victim, but as evidence that when integrity takes flight, injustice loses altitude. I wouldn't be here today without the kindness and courage of those who refused to look away, and I promise to pay that forward." He stepped down from the podium, the creak of the metal stairs echoing like a gentle landing. Johnson met him at the bottom, her warm nod passing between them. She placed a proud hand on his shoulder. "Well," said First Officer Carter, she whispered, using the honorary title they'd given him for the day. "Welcome to the flight deck of change." Malik's heart swelled, no longer a passenger in his own story, but co-pilot. The recruits stirred, offering shouts of thank you and applause that rippled like wind across the tarmac. The simulators hummed back to life, their screens inviting trainees to take the controls. But this time the trainees felt uplifted not only by technical mastery, but by the moral altitude Malik's journey had charted. As the session ended, Malik lingered by the hangar door, watching engines spool up. He felt the hum reverberate through his bones, a tactile reminder of propulsion momentum and forward motion. Prejudice, he knew, could ground a man, but integrity and solidarity could launch an entire community skyward. Behind him, the recruits filed out, energized, no longer seeing the pilot lounge as a privileged enclave, but as a space they could earn through skill and character. Behind him, Khan, a shy recruit who had once whispered doubts about his own belonging, approached with a shy smile. "Sir, thank you for sharing. I'll remember what you said." Malik nodded, warmth flooding his chest. "We all deserve a chance. Never doubt that you belong here." He turned at last, stepping outside into the sunlit ramp. The horizon stretched wide, each departing flight a gleaming testament to human ambition. He inhaled the scent of jet fuel and possibility. Above, silver birds carved arcs against the sky, reminders that the world would always need dreamers brave enough to take judgment and prejudice in stride, and lift themselves and those around them back into the blue. And as Malik walked alongside Captain Johnson toward an awaiting simulator for his final demonstration, his wings of change firmly unfurled, He carried with him the certainty that when courage and compassion join forces, even the heaviest chains of bias can be broken, and every dream, no matter how deferred, can still take flight.